After the Epstein flap, the media is reporting that President Trump will announce a deal to send defensive weapons to Ukraine this afternoon, along with a plan to provide offensive long-range missiles later. The same media is boasting that this will create a complete break with all of us outside the corrupt beltway who believe the president would end the Ukraine war. That enemy boast assumes that Trump is abandoning his quest for peace and his break with America's post-war role as world policeman for the modern British financial empire. I believe it's political theater and a calculated deal-making gambit amidst a very complex situation. Trump is continuing his mission to transform the world map and achieve lasting peace. I'm Barbara Boyd. I've seen British psychological warfare tactics firsthand as applied to political organizations. Creating division using emotionally charged issues like child rape, civilian massacres, and war is a favorite tool of these mind benders. Today, I'm going to first cover Trump's planned announcement this afternoon about defending Ukraine and bringing Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. Next, I'll tell you about his new war against the Federal Reserve and his new moves to dismantle the deep state, along with the continuing fallout about the fake Epstein controversy. And last, I'm going to talk about what you can do to keep your mind clear in these times of necessarily turbulent change. Before we get started, if you haven't already, go to the Promethean Action website and subscribe. We want to be in contact with you outside Google's controlled space. So what's up with the Ukraine decision? Trump's battle for peace means ending our role as world policemen for the British financial empire, while building solid nation-to-nation state trade rather than globalization. Is it possible that the president has abandoned that and will now escalate the war in Ukraine, as Lindsey Graham and other crazed armchair generals claimed this weekend? Here's what we know. First, the British Empire's strategic policy is to snatch and loot Eurasia, starting with Russia, and that's the reason for their war in Ukraine. As opposed to Biden, Trump has fought that, opening dialogue with Putin for the first time in years and placing himself completely outside the mindset of our captured intelligence agencies and labile congressmen. He seeks a great power alliance with Russia and China and has staked his presidency on creating that. Despite this, Putin has continued the war aggressively and, according to Axios this morning, told Trump directly that the war will be solved by Russia militarily. That decision by Putin, if indeed it has been made, rests on the calculation that NATO will continue to attack Russia even without the United States, and that Trump is still not fully in control of the British Empire's forces in our military and intelligence community. Whether today's big announcement is part of a negotiating gambit or a mistake based on rigged intelligence briefings remains to be seen. It has little to do with realities on the ground in this war, which has been lost for some time. Russia knows that NATO does not have the industrial capacity or the will to sustain it. Now, both Putin and Trump are under enormous pressure to resolve the war militarily. Putin from his population and Trump from our deep state. The U.S. Senate is making an effort through language in the National Defense Authorization Act, which comes up Tuesday, to bar Trump from pulling out of the Ukraine war without their approval. There is also talk of Trump imposing secondary sanctions on China, India, and others buying Russian oil, which could jeopardize Trump's entire economic strategy. Despite this afternoon's deal-making gambit, there are still hopeful signs here. Secretary Rubio and Sergei Lavrov discussed a new approach to a Ukraine ceasefire in a meeting on Friday in Kuala Lumpur. And Putin is also continuing to aid Trump's peace efforts in the Middle East, telling Iran last week to agree to a peace deal with no uranium enrichment. We'll have more to say about this as it develops. But the lesson here, from our standpoint, is that there can be no compromises in targeting the modern British financial empire directly and educating the citizenry about the real stakes in this war. Now about the Fed. Toward the end of last week, the president opened a big attack on the Federal Reserve, which is the central nodal point of British imperial control of our economy. Let's listen to Judy Shelton, who Trump nominated to the Fed in his first term.
I think the Fed has a lot to answer for, and I think they're quite vulnerable on a number of fronts. Their models are off, and that they're afraid of economic growth. But now we're talking about a specific mechanism, which is the way the Fed manages interest rates is by paying commercial banks to keep the money sitting in cash at the Fed. So there's now 3.3 trillion sitting there, and the banks are collecting 4.4% on that. I think that the average American would be outraged, and I think the president would be furious because 44% of the over 600 billion that the Fed has been paying as interest payments to commercial banks since it started running an operating loss in September of 2022, 44% is going to foreign banks.
Did you hear what she just said? The Fed is insolvent, running in the red since 2022 because of Jay Powell's mismanagement. $30 trillion of private bank money, which should be lent into the economy, is parked there, paying interest to the banks at 4%. And a large share of that interest money is going to foreign banks. Powell's lavish remodeling of the Fed building is also under attack by the White House and the OMB. This attack just could result in repurposing the Fed into an institution favoring Trump's American system policies, forcing and facilitating the lending of funds by major banks into projects critical to our economic revival. We're going to fight to make that happen. Now, let's listen to Tulsi Gabbard at last week's Turning Point student conclave about the status of the war to take down our deep state.
You think the campaign was hard? You think what President Trump went through was hard? And it was. The road ahead will not be easy. I can attest personally that in my work as the Director of National Intelligence, the deep state is fighting us every step of the way. And it exists within every single federal agency. And so I feel the same frustration that I see many of you expressing on X or in different platforms about why aren't things going faster? Why aren't we getting results more quickly? I feel this frustration every single day. We are pushing hard. Know that they are pushing hard back.
Her point is well taken. When looking at the non-answers we have around Butler assassin Thomas Crooks and the other assassination attempts and most other incidents in the 10-year coup we have all suffered through. It's also relevant to the current eruptions about Jeffrey Epstein. The deep state is still alive and fighting back. We've been down a hard road, but it's about to get harder until we succeed in fully purging this virus from our system. They are fighting back. Until last week, when the Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration was free to fire people, there were constraints on purges at DOJ, state, and elsewhere. As of Friday, however, it's been full speed ahead, with wholesale sacking of J6 prosecutors and agents and special counsel Jack Smith's prosecutors and agents, along with more than 1,000 State Department employees. Also last week, the Department of Justice opened investigations on John Brennan and James Comey. That concerns Obama's fake intelligence assessment that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help Trump. But John Solomon reported on Saturday that's only part of a much larger conspiracy case, which has been under construction at the Department of Justice for months and covers the entire legal coup up to the 2024 election. I have to think that you have to look at the possibility that the Epstein flap has been engineered to prevent just this case from coming to fruition. I also think this case won't work unless it starts from the top. And that means, you guessed it, ending the cover-up of the British role here. They instigated and ran large parts of the ongoing coup against Trump, starting with GCHQ dossiers compiled on his campaign staffers beginning in 2015. We have covered this extensively, from the dirty Christopher Steele dossier to the British operations against Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, and others, which were laundered through the CIA and State Department to the FBI, and of course, the 24-hour media sliming and information war run through the British Foreign Office's Integrity Initiative cells in our media. That has been critical and the covered up most element missing in everything in these investigations to date. Now, in my Saturday wrap, I laid out the case for Jeffrey Epstein being a high-level intelligence asset of several intelligence agencies with a primary skill set in laundering dirty money for the wealthy and intelligence services into British offshore money havens. Any U.S. files about his crimes, if they exist, are held by case officers in the CIA and were never at the FBI. It's also likely that his real owners are British intelligence or the Mossad, in which case you're chasing ghosts, as President Trump said over the weekend. The current British ambassador to the United States, Lord Mandelson, knows a lot about this, as he was deeply entwined with Epstein's operations. Is that where this flap is being generated? Steve Bannon, who has been leading the charge on what's being called an Epstein cover-up by him, also knows better. Steve Bannon was hired as a consultant for Jeffrey Epstein immediately after Bannon was fired from the first Trump administration. His job was to rehabilitate Epstein's image. Bannon knows that Epstein's deviant sex involved paying prostitutes of all ages to service him, and that he was primarily an operative in the dark world of organized crime and intelligence, what I call Dope Incorporated. His sex crimes were personal. The internet memes about a mythical, vast Epstein sex ring resemble QAnon in their ability to destroy the critical thinking of everyone who gets absorbed in them. They divert attention away from real child trafficking, which should demand our attention, like the 300,000 missing kids in the hands of human trafficking cartels now lost in our country because of Biden. So how do you find the truth in this environment? Well, the great poet and historian Friedrich Schiller was a huge fan of our American Revolution, and he originally thought the French Revolution was just like ours. But then he witnessed with horror that revolution descending into a terrorist bloodbath and then into Napoleon's dictatorship. The cause, he said, was that a great moment has found a little people. We can't be little at this great moment now. Our British imperial enemy understands well how to exploit both our ignorance and an elite which has lost its moral compass. They've been doing it for centuries throughout their colonial empire. Taking that great educational task upon yourself and studying the great thinkers of history as your intimate friends and allies is what the leaders of Trump's Republican Party must do now, and what we here at Promethean Action aim to provide to you. So, as Tulsi Gabbard told you from her inside position as Director of National Intelligence, this is a war in which we have yet to vanquish the enemy. They are fighting back. Don't fall for cheap ideas or simple-minded, emotion-laden plots about non-existent conspiracies. Finding the truth requires intellectual stamina, along with a kind of Socratic examination of principles and method which our founders used. We're adding a new weekly show with Susan and myself to help in this educational process. If you go to Promethean Action and become an email member, you'll be the first to know the time and date. We'll also be covering a lot more of these developments in posts on the website. Thanks very much for listening. I'll see you again on Saturday.
Thanks for watching. Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com.